Well, there are some days where you really want to do things, and there are other days where you really don't.
Today's day, I don't really feel like recording this with you.
And I don't feel like recording it with you. But here we
Been
are.
a bit of a morning.
It has been. We've promised to keep these conversations real. And usually we give ourselves a couple days to edit this, to get our heads on straight. This week's been a busy one. It's Wednesday. We always share these on Wednesday. So here we are.
Here we are.
We've backed ourselves into this corner, so to speak. How about we start our day over?
Let's do it.
Okay. Right now, well, good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to
Good
see
morning,
you.
Dave. How'd you sleep?
I actually slept pretty darn good.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, I slept great.
Like a rock.
I tend to always sleep good, though. It takes me all of about 30 seconds to knock myself out. And
I'm aware.
yeah, it takes you much longer. So today,
Today.
want to talk about space?
I do. Yeah. Something that we've committed to sharing on this podcast is just all the challenges, the great things and the challenges that come along with making a move like this. And this week, space really came up for me in...
Oh, for me too.
Fair enough.
So how did it show up for you this week, this idea of space? Why don't we start over on your end?
Okay. So I guess what I mean by space is the ability to leave for a few days even and have some alone time to just reset, build some more capacity. That's always been a really important part, not just of my own well-being, but our relationship too. I used to find, even when we first met, if I could feel the tension building between us and we were really busy, I always knew that like a weekend away together would reset our relationship, and it was really impactful. So, I mean, coming here, this choice that we've made means that I don't think I've had one 24-hour period yet where I haven't been with one of the kids, all the kids, you. There's very little space.
Yeah, and you're entirely right. And we have a lot more space during the days. Like one of the nice things about living in a place that's 6 hours ahead of where our life is, if you will, or at least our work and our primary relationships, is that it feels like we have two different days. We have the morning or the front 9 of the day and the back 9.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we've created a lot of space for ourselves day to day, but you're right. Like having that space in a more prolonged way or fashion to be able to just be the two of us or just be on our own. We really lack the family support around us as well. And even the friend network to be able to say, hey, kids are going to go and hang out with their friends for the night. Will's hanging out with a buddy too.
Yeah.
And there's just not those serendipitous types of opportunities to be able to spontaneously even find it as well, let alone being able to step away for a few days or a long weekend.
Yeah, and I think this really came to me this week because I overheard you listening to a podcast and it was about capacity. And I've been feeling just as we get through some exams and some other things that like I could use a bit more capacity. And I feel like my nervous system's starting to respond in an unfavorable way to the fact that I don't have capacity. But this podcast was talking about how your body goes back to homeostasis, like your old patterns when you hit a certain threshold above what you have capacity for. Like you can do 5%, you can do maybe 10%, but there's always going to be this ceiling where when you hit it, it's too far and your body just goes back to all of its old patterns. And I feel that this week quite a bit, like my body going back to some of its older patterns. And so this is what really brought this idea of space to my attention.
It was an interesting conversation that we've had over the last few days because we were reflecting on this idea of capacity and how to create more of it and how day to day, like I said, we have more capacity there. I would say more marginal space to be able to push a little harder or to lean into a few extra things. And there's a different type of space, which is this prolonged space, multi-day, multi-week space where I've been able to have opportunities in shamanic ceremony or even on my own retreats to really step away. And I was sharing with you how impactful that's been, being able to really expand my ability to hold more, to be with more, to not just push, but actually expand the field of play. I was with a great group of ladies last night talking about this. If you imagine a football field, we're all running up and down every single day, trying to get to the end of the day, the end zone, the goal, trying to get all these things done. And most of us are playing with the right side of the field, only a fraction of it.
Yeah.
And it's easy to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do we get there? How do we find different tactics or ways of doing that? But there's also spending time to actually expand the field of play.
Right.
Expanding your capacity and what's available to you.
Yeah.
And that's what I was really feeling you call out, was how you've been yearning for more and more of that space here, and just how difficult it is when you make a move like this and just by circumstance don't have a lot of the key ingredients that really enable that. Does that seem fair?
For sure. I think, not to like genderize the conversation, but I think in like that, I have a lot of those typical female characteristics where I want to like, I feel very responsible to nurture and care for all the people in our lives and my family beyond that too. And so in moving here, I feel even more of that. There's even more resistance to me going and taking the time that I would normally take, because I don't have all the pieces. I feel like the bottom of the pyramid, and like what happens if you pull that pyramid out, right? And I think it's interesting you were pointing out to me this week that maybe the way that I perceive that is something that is deeper for me than just what I'm thinking about it as, like, oh, I couldn't possibly go because all these things are happening in our life and I need to be there to help. Who will drive to soccer? Who will do this?
Well, yeah, I was
Manage all the
highlighting to you.
pieces.
I was highlighting to you that if we think back to the last time you went away, and it was down to Sedona.
Yep.
You went for a full week. And I was just reflecting back to you that when you went away that week, it was one of the greatest weeks that I've ever had with the kids, because it gave me an opportunity to fully be with them. And it just was a moment where we could go back into that space to look at the fear that you have and the worry that you have, and also challenge it a little bit to say, well, you have the full support to be able to go and do that.
Right.
We have a really great dynamic where we're both always enabling each other to go and do those things. So could it be possible that there's something deeper there or more internal for you that really is the core barrier, not just, there's so many people depending on me.
Right.
I think that's very superficial compared to something much more core. And last night, I remember you had come out of the bathroom and you were just like, I just had an aha moment. So let me share that, because I think that's interesting way that you were able to identify that this has been something with you that even predated having kids.
Oh, yeah. Like if I was thinking back along the timeline, because as we were having the conversation about space this week, Dave was saying like, okay, so like, what about this weekend? Why don't you go away? Why not find something to do? Why don't you just go? Why not tomorrow? What do you... And then I was like, oh, actually, I could go tomorrow. And he's like, well, no, tomorrow's not a good day.
The other tomorrow, not tomorrow.
It was metaphorical.
Right, but we were having a conversation that was very action-oriented.
Yeah.
And like, hey, how can we make this happen? What's possible? What's available over the next few weeks?
Yeah, and my brain just wanted to keep circling back over all the reasons why that wouldn't work. And so anyway, my aha moment was just that I actually think I've always had a reason not to go and do these things. Like even I think about when I was a teenager and younger, worrying about my parents and not being able to leave and go in, or about my boyfriends cheating on me if I wasn't there, or about the kids' well-being, or whatever it is. There's always something that prevents me from being free, and which I think is so interesting. I'm sure it's a coping strategy I've learned to control situations by being ever present, because maybe things can't go wrong.
Sure. If you have the high watch.
If I have the high watch. This morning proved that that's not the case, because things went wrong anyway, even though I was here.
Well, hey, you said it, not me.
The high watch, which in and of itself is stressful for me. But it's been really interesting to just see clearly how unfree I've actually been. And the times that when I can think of in my life when I felt most balanced, most capacity, most free, it's not because I did it anyway. It's because those were the times in life when everything else was smooth. Nobody else really needed me. There was a balance to my life. Kids were good. They were doing their thing. Parents are good. I didn't feel like I needed to manage any of those. And so I was very free, and I felt like, oh, I solved this problem for myself. Look at me. I'm so free.
Yeah.
But then as soon as something else comes back into my environment that's stressful, that feels like it needs my capacity, I just give my capacity away. I don't force the time. And then it just slowly drains me. This is really what I've come to notice.
So what feels right then for you as a next step in creating space? Because I think it's really neat to be able to reflect at a deep enough level to recognize that the day-to-day excuses that we have around why doing things that I know you want to go and do, and anytime you've ever gone to do, you've been elated about
I love space.
I
hate doing what to do. I do it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
So
my favorite.
what's the opportunity there? Like what do you feel is the right next thing?
I feel a little bit like you use the metaphor a lot of the rocket ship and like how much fuel it takes to take off. But then after that, you're coasting. And so I feel like one of the challenges that talking about the challenges again, I've noticed being here is that it's like more fuel required. I don't have my usual places or things that I might do. It's like I have to start from scratch. Not only do I have to find the energy or like the strength to leave the things that I feel I'm really important to in the dynamic, I also have to find something that feels like it's going to be meaningful and worthwhile. And now I'm like away from the things that I've established in the past. You were lucky coming here that you already had these shamanic retreats, for example, that were like in your calendar, ready to go. You just go to them. And so I feel like, I don't know, the next step is trying to figure out what I really want to do. Or maybe the next step is just going away for a day to think about what the next step is, but actually doing it not here, like doing it in a capacity that is more in my own space so that I can have more time to think and evaluate what that could be. I mean, action precedes thinking, right? Or should.
Should, yeah. Well, and we even know, like, I think of our friend Greg Wells, who talks a lot about the different brainwave frequencies that we experience in the different states. And immediately when you talk about these two very different environments, one that you marinate in 99% of the time.
Yeah.
And the other one that you know is so helpful and healthy and meaningful. To me, I see as two very different states of being. And when you talk about homeostasis and kind of like coming back to one, it almost reminds me of like addiction in some ways, of actually using that and that the high watch as a way of continuing to come back. And it's not really a problem as much as it is a solution to something.
Right.
Right. And I think that's what you've teased out and recognizing that you've had this for a long time. The problem isn't like, oh, I can't seem to go and find space to go and do on my own and to be able to be on my own. I actually think that at a much deeper level, that's the solution for you, right? Which is allowing you to be able to overcome that fear and that worry that you have of something happening to other people or somebody betraying you in those various different spaces. And when I think about those brainwave states, it's like beta, 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 that one that we're also familiar with.
Yes.
And it's hard to actually do strategic thinking and to be able to even understand or dream unapologetically when you're in that type of state.
Right.
Right? That's all a state around fighting, flighting, fixing.
Yeah.
It's a very active and responsive environment, one that most of us spend so much time in. But these alpha states where we can be a lot more creative, right? Things like water, things like nature, different fractals we know create these types of environments, or movement at lower to moderate levels of intensity are all great ways to actually put ourselves into that state. And so I think you actually answering those questions of what do you want to go and do, and what's at a deeper level for me, and what really is this constraint that I'm trying to take the shackles off on metaphorically. It's almost impossible, I think, to find it in that beta state.
Right.
I would argue that the answer to it is actually in the very space that you're afraid of taking. You understand?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Yeah. I and have experienced that
Right.
in the past. that
Absolutely.
Even if it feels silly or frivolous at first, it's always very deeply meaningful for me when I do take that time. And it always does get me to the next threshold of capacity, as we were talking about. I think we've talked about this, I think, in the podcast.
Yeah, this is
In the podcast.
Yeah,
At
you
the podcast.
you go into
is-
the
yeah.
podcast. That's right. That's right.
In the podcast before that, like some of the space I took last year is probably the reason that we're here. It was the ultimate kind of decision-making power came from taking enough space to see the bigger picture of what was next for us. So yeah, it's not that I even haven't experienced it. And I know for people that I work with, and probably you too, it's a similar story, right? It's like, I know this is so good for me. I know I need this. And yet somehow the days, the weeks, the months go by. You don't do it. You don't find the thing you want to do. You don't prioritize it. I don't know. It's obviously something much deeper.
Well, we had a good conversation with Quinn last night just around her own expectations of herself. And she's a kiddo who has, well, big expectations, big dreams, and holds herself accountable to them. And how at the beginning of any journey, we were thoughtfully reflecting back to her how even in our own experience, when we go and start new things, it's easy to get frustrated because you want to be where you know you can be and where you should be.
Yeah.
But that's just not where you are. Right. And I think one of the things that was helpful last night was reminding her and ourselves in many ways that there are these phases that we go through when we transition. It's been put in many different ways. I like the idea of the storming, norming, and performing, right, as different phases.
Yeah.
And I would argue that in the last 4 months and being here and getting settled in, we are still in that storming and just starting to exit that now and getting into a bit of a norming phase.
Right.
And I think with that is the reminder that as we kind of get into that norming, it's about building some rhythms back and some consistency in that. Many times trying to create these types of spaces, you mentioned with these pre-scheduled retreats that I have. The nice thing about that is once you make the choice, it's kind of like doing an Ironman. You make the choice when you're on your couch. It's comfortable, makes sense. You're not really faced with the actual consequences of what that means to sign up for that. And then all of a sudden that day starts to come. Right? And you're making a decision for your future self, not so much your present self. And I think that might be a big part of us transitioning, and maybe even over the next few weeks, looking at January, February, March, April, is what is the space that we're going to be creating and designing that or placing that back in a little bit more proactively. That way it's not so much of a mental load to always be thinking about it. And for me, what I've always found personally really helpful is even when I find myself yearning for that space, if I have it scheduled, partly actually like scheduling it and figuring out that space in and of itself is therapeutic because it's like, oh, this is exciting. I know I'm going to go and take it. And even though I haven't taken it, the process of planning for it feels like I am doing something for myself.
Right.
And it feels like I'm making momentum. But also when things come up and I find myself yearning for it or frustrated that I don't have it, if I know that it's there, I'm like, oh, okay, well, don't worry about it. It's coming.
Right.
75 more days. 7 more days, whatever that is.
I want to go back to the idea of the storming, because I think that really hit on something for me of how you get stuck not doing these bigger things for yourself. Because I knew coming here that I would be pretty locked in for the first chapter, right? I knew you had to travel for work and you have your retreat and like the different things that you had. So I knew I would be like locked in, and that's great. I'm totally fine with that. But I think I kind of forgot a little bit or didn't take into account the fact that it's storming. So you need a lot of extra capacity to, like, I thought, oh, it would be fine, but I forgot to take into account like all these things are going to happen. It's going to be more and more and more stressful, more and more and more capacity required to get through the storming phase. And much like as we experienced a storm here or any storm, when it's happening, it cuts off your ability to see you're like in it, if that makes sense. Like the roads aren't open and the flights aren't going. And like, that's what it feels like, right? You're like, have to respond to all the urgent things coming up and you're just on the ground, like doing it and doing it. But then that's where I feel like I have sort of missed something really important in this last arc of our journey, is like, I should have been forcing those spaces, anticipating that I would need them in the future instead of like waiting to get through this storming phase. Because I've needed more capacity probably than even I have, right? So then it's kind of pushing me back into this state of homeostasis, or what my body perceives that as, which is not a very good state for me. My norms hold me from going, because it's like protect, care. That's my homeostasis. Stay vigilant, stay alert,
which
help
is
as much as you
very
can.
energy intensive.
Yeah, even more.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's stuck in the storm, but like, we don't know. It's not like
It's interesting.
December's here, Christmas. Oh, now we're in it's a chapter, but it's not. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Then we're into exams again. Then we're into all these different phases. So, I think it's important to acknowledge like how you get stuck there, or how those things sort of go on the chopping block. Or not even in my awareness, to be honest, until this week.
Yeah, and it's as that stress load kind of comes up and you get more and more focused on where you're at and trying to deal with that stuff, it's easier and easier to forget about these perceived luxuries of being able to have that. And what I'm hearing you say is like that liftoff phase and knowing that this is storming. In hindsight, you wish that you would have recognized the intensity of energy output that would be required in that.
Exactly.
And then had thoughtfully slotted in some time to be able to regroup and regain some of your capacity.
Exactly.
Knowing that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like prioritizing that, but instead in my mind, I was just prioritizing helping all of this go well and being like the person with the umbrella.
Yeah.
Storm.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to thinking about this part of it where it's like, oh no, I'm running out of capacity.
Right.
Now what?
Well, and I remember on our walk the other day, thoughtfully twisting the perspective a little bit on you, just to respectfully offer that it's actually irresponsible.
For anybody who's curious, it's really fun to be married to Dave. These are the kind of conversations I get to have. This podcast basically turned into therapy for Jen.
Right. But like I say that with a tremendous amount of reverence and respect for how much you do for our family.
Yeah.
And how important that is to you. And that the reason why you don't go and do those things is because you want to make sure that you can continue to have that hypervigilance and have that presence.
Right.
Of which all of us derive so much from. And so reminding you that you not taking that space is actually hindering the very capacity that you have a gift of being able to offer to others. And so trying to help you see how not only do we have the ingredients for you to go and take that space, but how, like you had said with the Sedona piece, like you're very much a linchpin in our family. When you actually go and take those spaces, it's typically shortly thereafter, there's an unlock that exists. And I would say in our system as a family, I think me evolving my own capacity is one thing, and it's something I'm proud of that I continue to spend time on. But it doesn't have the same upside as you increasing your capacity in our family. And I wonder if that's true for other families too, if there's like one kind of key person in that family system and dynamic. I just noticed that like when you do it, there's like a multiplier on effect on all of us.
Yeah, that's
compared to where when I do it, it's like, oh, Dave's back.
Right. Well, yours
You
is
know?
more steady.
Sure.
You take unapologetically whatever time you want and need.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. So that's more steady, and
I
mine
don't
is
have
more
that.
in like
I don't have that same worry.
inflection. Yeah.
Right. I don't have that same worry. I have other worries and other shit. Episode 10, maybe we can spend it on that.
Yeah. Can I therapize you next time?
Sure. Yeah. But point being is, I think that's an interesting realization for me too in this, is that all space is not created equally, and all changes in capacity are not reflected equally in the system of our family.
Yes, that is true. Yep. Yeah,
So
I
where are
really
you
feel
going?
that.
Maybe you can update us on that another time.
Can I go to the tennis center in Majorca, please?
Hey, pack your bag. Let me bring you to the airport this afternoon. After the morning we've had.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, let me buy your ticket for you. How long do you want to go? 17 days or 22?
Hey, if you're down, I'm down. See you later.
Oh, too funny.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think it's such an important idea that we're having. This conversation means a lot to me, and no matter what you're doing, no matter where you're leveling up in life, and no matter what you're designing, I feel like this is the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
You make a choice to change your job or move to a new country or move to a new house, and suddenly it's like you're in the storming part where you need more capacity. And if you haven't really built that up in advance, then you're wearing yourself down if you don't have that space. I can really see how critical that is, especially in this phase. So I feel like it's such an important conversation for, poco a poco, but also with them.
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask? I'm not even going to ask permission. I'm just going to ask.
Great.
The storming phase,
Yeah.
there's a lot
Yeah.
in there. And what we're kind of going back to is this duality of output and input, doing things and then recovering,
Yeah.
right? And we're both disciples, if you will, of that type of methodology and way of living.
Yeah.
Being able to, whether it's in the sauna, hot and cold, it's always kind of being able to oscillate back in between those to be able to sustain what we're doing.
Yeah.
When things get really tough like that, a lot of times the way that we cope with it is through numbing out, through dissociation. Like there's lots of different ways that we deal with that. About a week ago, you decided to stop drinking between then and Christmas. And it's just over this last week that the acute awareness around space
Yeah.
has started to come up. How has that choice impacted your experience or your exposure to the feelings that you've had that have made this a little bit more present, or has it at all?
I think two things from the not having alcohol
Yeah.
phase. Definitely have experienced an increase in how anxious I feel, because I think I for sure, a glass of wine or two at the end of the day really helps me to take the edge off the day.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
So for sure I do use it that way, and this has been increased the pain a little bit as we talk about
Yeah.
pain needs to be 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 if to actually do something about it.
Sure.
So the increased just twinge of anxiety,
Yeah.
I would say, is definitely relevant to thinking about how else can I get capacity, right? If I'm not using a substance or if I'm not numbing out in some way,
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable to live feeling anxious. So what else can I do?
I love that.
Yeah. So that in some ways, has increased the pain a little bit of not doing and taking that time.
And forced you to start asking that question of how else can I
How
get
else?
capacity?
Yeah.
Really interesting.
The other thing I would say that I've after my aha moment yesterday.
Yeah.
Is I've really noticed a real increase in the number of aha moments. If you just go back in our podcast, you'll see that probably every single week there's something that I'm like, oh, and that, and that. And I think part of that is being here and not having as many distractions, conversations, all the different things that my life was filled with before.
Yes.
You know, the mornings here, nobody's even awake. Like many times I'm walking in the park and it's 10 and I'm thinking, I should call. Nope, can't. 4 a.m. phone calls are not welcome.
Yeah.
So I have more time thinking and reflecting through just the different layers for me. So I also feel like that has been, like, I feel a bit of an increase in the frequency of moments that I'm like, oh, right. And that, and like they're coming quicker and more easily to me. And then cutting out alcohol for the month is also a little bit like, it increases the pain of it a little. That makes me want to think through it more. It's all just feels like a bit of a snowball, like an accelerated part of growth or self-awareness.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I asked, because I just found it interesting, not that it was causal by any stretch, but it's just become apparent just in our conversation that this particular conversation around space has all of a sudden kind of come out of the woodworks, and the desire more specifically to expand your capacity, which I thought was, I was just curious how that was related and if it was at all for you. Because for me, in my experiences, stepping away from different things that I've used in my life to help cope with those things, that has been my experience, is that it does increase the pain.
Yeah.
Right. And with that, it allows us to use pain as a tool, right, to better understand what is going on and to be able to ask much better questions, just like you beautifully illustrated. Like, well, how else can I go and find this capacity then?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's a beautiful, even gift to your kids too, and the people around you, to ask, what if I experience more pain in this situation? What if I don't let the numbness come in? Then what will happen? Right? Like, just the curiosity of, if I'm not using a glass of wine to help take the edge off the stress, what will that pain lead to?
Yeah.
Right? And can I hold that too? And if I can't, why can't I? And what do I need? Right? It's the cycle of allowing, like, the real truths and pain to lead you, rather than trying to make it go away, because it's easier. It feels like more capacity, I guess. Like, if I can, at the end of the day, have a glass of wine, and it's not like a bottle of wine. It's like just that little bit, just takes a little bit of an edge off the stress of the day, right?
Sure.
But that almost feels like capacity, but instead I think that's really just tolerance.
Love that word.
Yeah.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah. Just tolerating the discomfort instead of needing it to lead you somewhere better.
Interesting. Those two, like, the conversation, the dichotomy between capacity and tolerance.
Yes. Yeah. Resilience and tolerance, they're like very much the same energy, but used differently. So.
Well, this has been great, and I would say probably the most. Not that we ever script our podcast. We usually just have a couple bullet points written in front of us to say, like, hey, let's just make sure we kind of touch on this thing.
Yeah.
This was fun today, just to kind of crack it open and see where this went. So appreciate you very much. I feel like we've started our day in a much better spot now. This is great.
I love you.
I love you too.
Usually we say I love you at the beginning, but this is more like the end.
At this point, we are a few short weeks from heading home. Very much looking forward to that.
Yep.
For this week, I guess, in the coming days, what would be most helpful for you in continuing to explore this space conversation? How can I best support you in that?
I mean, I'm not sure it's a thing for you to support me with. It's really my own resistance that keeps me back. But I think anticipating that this isn't the end of a storming phase going into Christmas and into the new year, and that I'm getting some proactive things booked in the calendar maybe for the new year that look like space.
Yeah.
Not just for me, but for us.
Yeah.
As a family, I feel like we've been a bit grounded and rooted here, and I'd love to just expand out a bit.
What, you want to leave Blanca?
I love it here. Don't get me wrong. It's not an insult to you, Valencia. But yeah, I'd love to just see those things in the calendar ready to go so that no matter what phase we're in, when they come up, they're booked and I'm going.
Totally. Well, it reminds me, and perhaps this is a good conversation for us to lean into next time, is the value of the family-based camp practice. We're due for one.
We are. Yeah.
We had a really great family-based camp in the summer, especially between you and I, getting ready for this leg of the journey.
Yep.
Feels like we're coming off the trail now. We have an opportunity to take off the boots, take off the bag, look at where we've been, and use some of the pain, but also some of the exciting experiences that we've had too, to help us chart our course for where we're going next in that. So maybe we can talk about that in a future podcast, but at the very least, make sure that we have that space coming into the holidays too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'd also love to talk about what this has done to our relationship, this experience. So maybe that can
This
go on.
podcast, you mean?
No, this trip. This journey.
Sure.
I feel like a very evolved and different sense of our relationship. I feel like that would be a fun one too. So
Cool. Well, let us know in the comments, emails, text messages, however you want to reach out, which of those, if any of those, or other topics you'd be interested in us covering. We probably have 3 or 4 more episodes in this, I think, before we get home. And we look forward to seeing all of you and hearing from you here in the coming weeks.
awesome.
Okay, thanks.